Hey gang, it's Professor Bell again, and we're going to dive into Chapter 3. This is about population geography, and I will forewarn you, this chapter does indeed have a lot of maps at the very beginning, and because I know a lot of students have a difficult time reading maps, I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time on them, so I hope you'll stick with me though. This is a choropleth map of the entire world, and showing you from light colors is lower value, and the darker the color is, the higher the value. So we're looking at population clusters essentially, but also where people don't live. So they have the cartographer of this map, the guy who made this map, wanted you to see that there's intensity in three big places. So start with the East Asian culture. Cluster, and that is China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, a little bit of North Korea, but that's it. The next one, the Indian subcontinent, is getting huge now, though. India is about to catch China. You also have Pakistan, the sixth most populous country, with Bangladesh being the eighth, I believe. There's also Sri Lanka there and Nepal. Bhutan doesn't have that many people. Finally, your European cluster, that one is several countries, as you can see. Russia, but not Siberia. This area right here is Siberia. This is where I mean in Russia, where 80% of the Russian population lives here in the West. That you have Germany, France, United Kingdom as well. And those are the three big clusters, but let's do at least look at places like Ethiopia, Nigeria. I think Nigeria has like 1 in 6 of all Africans is a Nigerian. There's a lot of Nigerians. Huge state. South Africa, for instance, and these states around Lake Victoria, like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. Okay, you've got these areas right in here, coastal and southern parts of Brazil. You do have some people in the Andean, reaches, but not that many. Most of America's population is here on the eastern seaboard, and then out here on the west coast. So about 150 million people are on this area called the Boswash, Boston to Washington, D.C. If you go to Canada, I think there's 60% of the people live there on what's called Main Street, essentially just across the border from Detroit over through Montreal, I believe. You also see singular places like Java Island. There's way over 100 million people living there. But then you see these places that just really don't have any people. The outback of Australia, the Congo Basin, the Amazon Basin here, the Great Plains, the boreal forest of North America, certainly Greenland, most of it's ice, just people living along the coastlines at inlets and fjords. Siberia, the sleeping land, very few people. The deserts of Central Asia, all of these are deserts. The Gobi deserts here. This is high elevation, though. This is the rooftop of the world. Let's see, the Himalayas are right here, and I'm losing my train of thought. My dogs are hungry and bothered me. This is Tibet, the two plateaus, Qinghai and Shutsang Plateau, and also the deserts of Xinjiang out here. Anyway, point is, we see where the highest numbers of people are and the lowest numbers of people are. So hopefully at least that makes sense to you, and why there are people in certain places, because there's probably good geography there. And why aren't they in Greenland or Siberia, or I realize I left out the Sahara Desert here. Why are they not there? Few resources, too hot, too cold, too wet, or too dry. That Goldilocks thing makes sense to you in the real world. At least I hope it does. Okay, looking at sustainable consumption of resources, humans have a real problem with that. We're trying to be more sustainable. I have tried really hard to be more sustainable, but I went to a calculator that does ecological footprint, and I just found out some really disturbing news. I'll show it with you in just a second. What are we? We're 4% of the world population as Americans, but we consume basically 25% of all the petroleum. That's not good. Part of it isn't on our individual, I'm driving my car around. It has a lot to do with the industries and other economic activities we have here, but that says something about living a very high standard of living. And we're going to see how that affects in other places when we look at sustainable development or unsustainable consumption of resources. So with petroleum, there you see it. And exceeding a carrying capacity of a place is never good. That will lead to famine, war, blight, all disease outbreaks, all kinds of bad things are going to happen. And one last thing before I go forward to show you that Walt Tobler, his first law of geography, he's a famous geography professor, and I won't quote him exactly, but it's basically this. All things in geography are connected to everything else, but near things are more connected than far things. So I know you think a lot of our gasoline and stuff comes from Saudi Arabia, and well, some does, but it makes more sense to get our own resources, but also from nearby places like Canada and the tar sands area that they have, and Alberta. Mexico's got loads of petroleum that we use. Not gasoline is just a part of. I mean, petroleum is used for all kinds of things. From oils and whatever to plastics. But Colombia, Venezuela is an OPEC state, so they do belong to the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So do pay attention that proximity to things means you're going to be more connected. Thus, it costs more to get our stuff from very far away. Okay? That said, let's look at how bad Professor Bell is. The lifestyle I live right now is terrible for this planet. And I'm conscious of that. But the house I have, the heating and cooling I use, the computer power that I'm using to make these presentations, the miles I drive, the flights I take, all kinds of stuff goes into this calculation. And essentially I used up my resources, Earth's resources, by April 1st. Okay? That's not a good sign, especially if I'm trying to make it better. So here's the deal. When we look at high populations, that does not have to mean that's necessarily a bad thing. If we look at crude birth rate, crude is just a basic total of how many live births per thousand population. You can see the definitions here. But the point is, you might think because of that high birth rate and population growth rate that you see for these African states, okay, Mali, Niger, Chad, Nigeria I'd mentioned, Democratic Republic of Congo to Tanzania to Angola, okay? You might think they're consuming a lot of resources because there's a lot of people there. It's not the case. I bet you I consume more resources than most 25 Congolese people do. And so population curtailment, as we'll see, curtailing population growth does not necessarily mean that it will be sustainable. So I want you to get that through your heads. A lot of people don't know that, and I'm talking about government officials and other people. Just because a population is low doesn't mean it doesn't still consume at an unsustainable level. Okay, so that said, let's keep going. This graphic right here is showing you the total fertility rate for these certain regions. So certainly Africa has more fertility rate, and I'll show you a direct connection with that is economics. The more economic development a place has, the fewer people there are. The lower the fertility rate and fewer people, babies being born. And that's just a fact. If you're poor, and you don't have TV sets, and you don't have vacations and cars and boats, how are you going to have fun? Exactly. You're going to have sex. More likely to, you're going to be a farmer or involved in some sort of extractive type job where you're cutting wood or fishing or whatever. And more hands means more food that you can farm and grow or hunt and gather. All right? So connect those things so you understand. But obviously, another thing is education too. So the more education you have in a society, especially with women, you delay marriage, you delay childbirth, you delay and lessen the number of babies that are going to be born in that family, in that region, in that society. Okay, so we do see declining fertility rates among women of Europe. even in the Caribbean and Latin America. You're going to be surprised by something I show you here in a minute too about all the unwed mothers in Latin America. And the same holds true for Canada and the United States here for North America. I'm sorry my pointer doesn't show up for me here, so I'm sorry my pointer is just racing around the screen. I can't always see it. I apologize. Crude death rate. So again, a number of deaths per 1,000 people within a population. What is this showing you? Well, there's some complicating factors in here. Very well developed places like Germany, it's quite high. And why is that? It's an aged population. But what about Mali down here in Africa? This is Mali, or Chad right here, or South Sudan, or Central African Republic, or Ivory Coast. They don't have as much access to medicines, hospitals. Childbirthing is often done with a midwife and not in a hospital. Any kind of breech birth or any kind of complication might mean the death of the child and the mother. So, ponder over those data and understand what they mean. That doesn't mean, for instance, that Russia is not well developed. It's pretty well developed. Their economy does suck, though, because it was driven by communists for so many years. But this is an aged society, and the young people in a perilous new market-driven economy aren't willing to have children. We'll talk more about this later, but this certainly shows you why the death rate might be high in a place like that. And fewer babies being born offset some of that too. HIV infections. This is a big deal. For me, in my generation in the 1980s, when we first started hearing about it, people were afraid of public bathrooms and fountains and everything else. Well, why were we afraid of it? Same way we're afraid of pandemics like the coronavirus or your Ebola. You don't know much about it. It's kind of scary. That was true then, but now, are you really afraid of HIV and AIDS? You shouldn't be afraid of it. You should know about it and respect it, to know that you shouldn't have unprotected sex, share needles, things of this nature. We do see it higher in parts of Africa, though, where mothers do suckle their children. So maybe they're HIV positive. Their baby is born HIV negative, but it can be transferred through bodily fluids. So mother's milk may infect the child. We do see it really on the rise here, though, in Russia and, well, the Russian domain, eastern parts of Eastern Europe here. This is Belarus, Ukraine. That's Romania. This is Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, the Caucasus states here. Why is it so high there? The dirty needles, they have a lot of health factors and stuff, but they have drug usage for sure here. I don't think it's so much as unprotected sex. It is a developed country. These are developed countries, but in some ways they're really kind of behind, and their data doesn't make sense. Again, because of the Cold War and the 45 years they lived under, communist domination and oppression. Okay. I don't know if I should say more about these places. Read about them in the book. You can ask questions if you want on the discussion board, as always, and I'll do my best to answer them. Infant mortality rate. This is for children, for babies before reaching the age of 1. Now we're going to see, I'm not sure if I have it, but I'll tell you the difference between it and child mortality rate. The child mortality rate is under age 5. So any child that dies before age 5 falls into that category, but specifically looking at infants dying in that first year, here you see it, and it is problematic in places. Take note that that isolated countries and landlocked countries like Bolivia and Paraguay do have problems with it. Certainly Haiti and Dominican Republic do, even though they're connected to the water and pretty close to the United States. That doesn't mean that health factors are going to be necessarily any better for them. In poverty places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, this is Myanmar, Somalia, or Mozambique. Infant mortality rates are quite high, and I already said, access to hospitals, doctors, medical treatments, drugs, and the like, not as abundant as we would hope. It's unfortunate that the reality is not everybody gets the same kind of health care. And I will reinforce this in the next part of the lecture. The same thing is true from different places in the United States. We all don't get the same kind of health care either. Okay, guys, I'm going to see you in part 2 of this lecture, chapter 3, about population geography. See you soon.